Let's start. Good morning. Good morning. Let's start. Let's start class. Don't walk out the back. Just sit where you are, even if it's in the aisle. Just on the ground or a chair, I guess. Good morning. Good morning, Zach. So I'm going to start with a couple of things that I want to just get out there first, and then this is going to be a very open for discussion because the second half of Numbers is weird at best and disturbing at points, and then there's festivals. So the first thing that I want to get out is a personal thing, and that is I'm having hearing loss in one of my ears, and so if I ask you to repeat yourself, like I'm not, like it's a very legitimate, like I can't hear you. So please speak up. It's an actual thing I'm going through. Anyways, that's not for. I'm doing something about it. I don't need pity or help. Just speak up. 2 is where we actually begin class, and that is trying to figure out which one. Let's go, Chris, Oakdale or the Thunder? Oakdale it is. So in 2008-ish, there was a group of people that got together and decided that there was going to be a church plant around Oakdale, or there was going to be a church plant. I think that there was a lot of details to be worked out at that point, and there was a lot of logistic meetings, getting that all put together, and eventually they started meeting over at the Memorial Road Church of Christ, and they met in the Fellowship Hall area Summit, and they met there for a year and a half. It got up to about 70 or 75-ish people, and then there was a big send-off in October of 2010, and there was a send-off, go, do, and then the Oakdale Church on 10-10-10 began meeting over at the school, directionally, and met there with 70 to 75 people for years. 4 or 5, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. And it would be fun. Like you'd get up there on a Sunday morning and you'd be like, I think there's like 120 people here, and it'd just be very very, very fun. And we did that for years. There was several campaigns to raise funds for a new building, to build a new building, and it was going to be about 1.25 miles east of here, on Hefner, on the other side of Air Depot. And there was land. The land was given to us, more or less. Give-ish, not given. Purchased at a very reduced price. Given-ish. It's the same thing. There was a lot of money raised. The problem is that there wasn't enough money raised. And we kind of hung in that area and tried to continue to raise the funds necessary. We were needing in the millions of dollars to build the facility, not just to build the building big enough, but also to do all the land work, to bring in water, to bring in electric, to do all the things necessary. And so like there was that period of like we're trying to get the money to do it, and we just couldn't get there. And we knew that we had to get out of the school, and then this opportunity opened up for this facility to be purchased, and we bought this from Oakdale Baptist, free and clear, no money owed on it, and then we've done renovations, so many renovations. This place looks awesome. The stage is a third of the size that it used to be, which is like as your worship leader, like I was really looking forward to like all the rhythmic gymnastics I was going to be able to do up there, but Another time, maybe. So we've done a lot of renovations. We've gone through a full cycle of elders. We had 3 to begin with, and they have those 3 originals have all stepped down, and we have 4 currently, 4 currently. I'm really good at counting things. And so that's where we are with our leadership. We got down, we've had numerous deacons throughout the year. We got down to where we just had 1. Earlier this year, we put in 7 more. The number of ministries that we have at this point doing different things is ridiculous. The leadership meetings that happen once a month where it's just like, here's the report of what our ministry is doing and our committee is working on. Like, it is a comical amount of things that are happening right now. And there's a lot of momentum building. Well, and you saw Larry Ferguson get up here this morning and talk about the mission stuff. That's just one of the pieces of things that is going on right now. And so on a Sunday morning for a worship time, we're averaging, without the college students here, we're 230, 240-ish. With the college students here, we'll bump up to 300. We've been up to 330, 340-ish, somewhere in there, which is a pretty good jump from the 70 to 75 that originally started in 2010. Why in the world am I telling you this? A lot of you guys already knew this. Maybe some of that was new information. Because I think that part of the discussion in Numbers is, where were you and where have you come and where has God led you? And I think that it's important for it's very there's a chapter, and I'm so bad at the chapter 33. Numbers chapter 33. It's just, so they walked out of Egypt. They walked out of Egypt in full sight of everyone while the Egyptians were burying their firstborn, which is a kind of a messed up start to a chapter. And then it says, and then they went to here, and from here they went to here, and from here they went to here. And that's the whole thing, 30-ish places that they just go and they just move through. This was where they went along the way. Just a good lesson in Hebrew geography. So I think it's one of the things that I was seeing in this is God's giving you the big overview of, look at where you were, very specifically, physically, and where are you now? He also does that spiritually. Where were you in Egypt, and where are you now? And it's unfortunately it doesn't, it's not as happy as we would like it to. Somebody got Numbers open, chapter 17. Verses 12 and 13, if somebody wants to read that out loud.
The Israelites said to Moses, "We will die, we are lost, we are all lost. Anyone who even comes near the tabernacle of the Lord will die. Are we all going to die?"
So positive, so happy. They're just running around giving each other high fives. Everything's so good. There's just this absolute level of discontent, like Daryl was talking about this morning. Nobody is happy with the situation, even though coming out of Egypt, it was specifically what they asked for. Please get us out of here. We need to leave. They leave and they're like, why did you bring us out of here? Just to die? And it's like, no, I've got things for you. And if you'll stick with me, I've got a plan and we'll get there. That's how I want to start. And now I want to ask you guys, and I've got a couple of other big, weird questions, but I want to hear, what do you see, what did you read this week that said that God showed as important? That was a terrible way to say that sentence. What was important to God in our reading this week?
mean, the major theme of Numbers to me is Israel trying and failing to follow the laws that God has set up to protect their holiness and their separation from the nations. The desert is kind of this place of punishment for them, but God always is there for them and forgives them.
Yeah. Well, he removes them from society to go, you don't need anybody else. I'm what you need. And let me tell you specifically, and like sometimes in like excruciating details. Numbers is tough to get through. Like the names. Oh, the names and the places. We're watching Rings of Power. Anybody else? And I mean, it reads like Middle Earth. Just all throughout there. But like he specifically says, I can take you, I can be the only thing that you need if you'll just stop doing dumb stuff. Yes, sir.
I think what I got is really important is that God is going to work his plan. None of the Israelites that were part of the first generation are going to go into the promised land. They're all there to die because of bad choices. But that's not just their story. That's also Moses' story. And it's not just Moses' story, it's probably my story too. I'm probably not going to be on this earth when Jesus physically comes back. I don't know, you're right. But we are all blessed to be part of the story, and we're all wrapped into God's plan. And God's going to go forward when he's ready to go forward. And that's the hardness of this.
There's several times that, well, to start out in chapter 16, people come to Moses and they're like, we're just as holy as you are. Why do you get to be set apart? And Moses is like, all right, let's play that game. Let's do this. Get your best 250 people and have them with their incense things. Censers. I Googled it just to make sure I could see a picture of it to where I knew exactly what that was. Censers, censers. And have them stand out there, and if nothing happens, then you're right. I'm not any different than any of you. However, if the earth opens up and swallows them alive down to the place of the dead, then maybe back off a little bit. And sure enough, he goes to God. Moses and Aaron go to God and say, hey, don't punish everybody for the sins of some or for the sins of one. And God's like, fine, everybody get away from these tents. These 3 tents of people, just back off. And then it says it swallowed them whole. The earth just opened up and swallowed them whole. And actually, like the language says, swallowed them alive to the place of the dead, which that's a sentence I don't fully understand. Because what does that mean? What does that mean? So then the 250 people, Levites, with the censers get burned by fire, and then they go collect all of them from the burnt corpses, still super happy in numbers, and then they hammer them out and turn them into the roof of the temple. It's very good imagery, but God has this very specific thing he's trying to do. Hey, these are the things I need you to do, and when you grumble against me and you turn your back on me and think that you're better and you know better, I'm going to push you to the side by having the earth swallow you, and then I'm going to move on with different people. But I've got a thing that God's going to move on with his plan. That's an interesting, in this time or this place in time, the idea of God doesn't like complainers and grumblers is very interesting because has anybody ever heard of social media? It's almost, except for pictures of kids and kittens, almost exclusively complaining. There was a young man who used to play football in this state. Last night, won the Heisman, and people were so mad about that. I mean, like, he shouldn't have. He lost 2 games to Utah. I'm just kidding. That was supposed to be a joke also. That got too specific. I see. I get it. But it's like, it's so easy to go down that path of I can be disconnected and tear down everything around me because everything around me is bad. So what I'll do, instead of like doing the right things and being a part of the right things and building things up, is I'll just continue to tear down because then I look smart and like I'm not the one in the wrong if I'm always talking about the bad that other people are doing. Is that along those ideas? You want to add to that, any?
In ways, I do wonder what life was like for the Israelites in the desert before God provided manna, before he provided quail. Were they living off of the supplies that they brought in from Egypt at this point? Like,
Probably, yeah.
and so were the ones that didn't have much running out, and instead of asking a neighbor, they just start complaining? Like, is that what's going on? And God's, what was God's plan prior to they ask, so we're going to give them manna?
Well, and so then you got to ask the question, was God waiting for them to ask? Is God waiting for you to ask? That's a big question that you can wrestle with this whole week. Like, was God just like, I've got manna ready to literally rain down from heaven if you will just ask? And so, because then after that, they're like, okay, we're done with manna now. Okay, can you just give us meat? And he's like, all right, you want meat? I'm going to ruin meat for you. You're all going to be vegans by the time this is done. It's going to be, does it say coming out of your nostrils? Is that the phrase? Yeah. You're going to eat it for a month and nothing but to where it's coming out of your nostrils. That is, all right. Oh, you want manna again? Okay, I got it. What else hit you in this reading this week? There was a lot of, it would be like narrative, so we're going to follow a storyline, and then it would jump to law, like, hey, whenever, you encounter a dead person, which, by the way that the law is talked about, or like the way that this cleanliness is talked about here, I think that Israelites and maybe probably like 1500, people encounter dead bodies way more than we do, because it's just like, hey, if you come across a dead body, which I never have, just go out and be outside of the city for 7 days to become clean. So there's this like, hey, we're going to talk about holiness and cleanliness, and then we're going to get back into the story, and then I've got some more law, and then I want to take you on a geographical trip to where all the places that you went. We're going to talk about the festivals that you need to establish. Let's talk about sacrifices, hey? And here's the very specifics of what you need to sacrifice and the amounts of each animal that needs to get sacrificed, and the all just very, very detail oriented. And then we're going to get back to a story, and then we're going to end Numbers. And so it was very like interwoven throughout. How, like, for the entire book of Numbers, that's kind of how it is. And that struck me as difficult to read, because you're like, wait, are we still in the story? God's just telling him, are we? So is this the narrative? Because we're just in the weeds right now. But I thought that was pretty good.
It sounded to me like Balaam was a prophet of God. Like, initially, first off, he said he's going to go off and listen for what God says.
Right.
that, I've not read that before. I thought he was just an oracle of some kind and that God came to him.
Right.
But he said he was going to go listen to what God had to say.
Each time. Yeah. Anybody want to do a quick recap of Balaam?
Israel, but consults with God and finds out that he shouldn't, and so he doesn't, and he's called back repeatedly by Barak to do the same job, but he refuses to because he cannot curse that which is blessed by God.
Right.
The,
That's it. You also get the cool story of the donkey, which, oh my goodness, I laugh so much because the donkey says, "Why are you hitting me?" And his first response isn't, "What?" He actually answers the question to the donkey, and he's like, "'Cause you're not doing what I wanted you to do," or whatever. I'm sorry. Did you just say something to me? I also appreciate the idea that it's like just the donkey talking from the donkey's perspective. It's not like the burning bush where it's like, "I am God, like listen to me." But the donkey is just like, "Come on, stop hitting me. I've always been a good donkey to you. Haven't I always taken you exactly where you wanted to go and done exactly what you wanted?" And Balaam's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Then this isn't any different." So it's just very funny to me. That's a very funny. I love laughing through that story. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sounds like he's obeying God, but then we have the whole, displeasure at him going and the, fiery angel and all that good stuff.
That is a hard one to get around, and also I don't have an answer to that because you're right. He's like, "Go with him," and then he puts a fiery angel in front of him 3 different times, and if it's not for this miraculous donkey, he dies. And then it says God opened his eyes and he saw and he was like, "Oh, okay. All right, well, good donkey." So,
God repeats, "Go with the men, but only the word that I speak to you." And I can't remember if it's in this passage or we find out later. Apparently, he gave Balak some insight into how they can possibly trip up the children of Israel and the whole, women, intermarriage or whatever thing.
sure.
And so it's almost like maybe he's told to go, but his heart, he ends up kind of going off the reservation.
Right. Well, and yeah, I think that, so it looks like Balaam is a prophet for hire, sort of. Like, I don't like the way that sounds. We're going to go with that, but I don't fully agree with that sentence, even though it was mine. But it looks like they sent for him and said, "Balak's going to pay you whatever, like, just incredible wealth if you do this." And he instead says, it doesn't matter. There's not enough gold on earth for me to go against what God wants. But for anybody to send for him to begin with means that he's probably had been sent for before. Like, this is like, "Hey, you guys should talk to this guy Balaam. He does curses and blessings, but only according to God." And so it could have been like the whole donkey incident with the fiery angel could be like a teachable moment for Balaam. Like, "Hey, I know that you're doing all this stuff, but like there's bigger things going on that than you even know. So like when things happen, like trust that they're happening according to my will. Bigger than you can understand."
Instead of possibly changing what God said to him.
Yeah. God put a word in his mouth and he went back and said, "Nope, not going to do it. Cannot do it."
Jeff, you used the word trust, and I think that's really what this whole journey is about. There's so many things, like small things, big things, but just, it's so detailed. And having 2 teenage boys in my house, one of the things we talk about a lot is if I can't trust you with the small things, how can I trust you with the big things?
We had that conversation this week.
And I'll tell you what, let me preface this and say Ben's a great driver, but he's got his permit right now. And it takes a lot of trust to be in the car with him as he's driving. And him questioning rules or telling me he doesn't like a certain rule while we're driving, that's not the time to have that conversation. You know, I'm like, I don't care whether you like this or not. This is the way it's supposed to be, so you can't ride down the middle of the road. You got to be to the right because that's the rule, right? And I'm happy when we're at home and the car is parked and we're all safe to ask me whatever you want about these rules. But I need you to listen to me. So if I say get over to the right, don't be in the middle, right? Just do what can you just do what I ask you to do? Can we see that you can follow directions? Can we see that you can trust me? I think God is okay with our questions. I think he's even okay with our laments. That's why we read the Psalms. He's okay with our crying out. But there are times to ask these questions. And Jesus even says, ask, seek, knock. I want you to do those things. But there's an appropriate time to do it, and there's an appropriate time to just follow.
Yes.
And I think that's what Numbers kind of teaches us. It's like, if it was so easy that even a caveman could do it, right? As Geico commercials, they could start their own nation, they wouldn't need God. But God is trying to teach them this whole trust thing.
There's the Israelites don't have water. They say, we need water. Moses goes to God and says, hey, we need water. And he's like, okay, speak to the stone and it will give you water. And Moses goes up and goes, oh, you want me to give you water? And he taps the stone twice and it opens up and gives water. Which, why did it open up when he tapped it instead of spoke to it, is a very interesting question. But God says after that, because you didn't honor me and trust me with what I told you to do, you also don't get to go into the land. It's exactly that. Like, if you'll just do the thing that I told you to do, if you speak to it and the rock opens up and water comes out, the people know that that's not you, that that's me. But what you had to do was tap on the rock to make it look like it was you, and you even said, you want me to give you water, and then water came out. And he's like, you couldn't just trust in what I told you to do long enough to just speak to a rock. It's less effort to talk to the rock. Here's a question. Are cleanliness and holiness connected? They're next to one another? Go. Like, I've heard that, you hear that a lot. Like, I've heard that, 100 times. But when we talk about the laws, when we talk about if you come in contact with a dead body, if you come down with something, there's a couple of different things that I'm not going to get into all the details. Get away from everyone. Spend time outside of the city for 7 days to become clean and to get back, to be able to come back. So what happens in those 7 days that allows you, is it a medical thing? Is it a purity thing? Is it a separation from everyone else cleanses you and allows you to be holy again? Also, I don't have the answer to this question. I see wheels turning, and if you go, no, these aren't connected like that, that's an answer too.
I think you can, clear my throat for my diatribe. I think that God puts holiness is being set apart, right? So I think God puts these regulations in place to make Israel different than their neighbors. And, I know that, there's some of these tribes that are throwing kids into fires to please gods. And that's being really close to dead people. from these other tribes are doing, and that's not Israel. Israel takes a different stand because they're God's people and set apart. I think that's a piece of it. That, and also, I don't disagree that there's some health, like God's like, hey, if you're around a body that's, died of plague, you probably need to make sure you're not going to die too. I think there's a big piece of that also. But I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think it's maybe this and that.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I think it's also a really important reminder to think about the fact that these people actually live in frighteningly close proximity to God himself,
To the presence and the glory of God. And so, all of these things would remind them, if you are unclean, you go further away from God. You need to be aware that you live in the same zip code that God's presence is in. And that hits differently.
There's like 20 different times where they're like, if just a regular person, non-Levite, non-priest, gets too close to God, then you just die. Like the end. Like that's the end of the sentence, and then it moves on to the rest of the story.
Well, but it's not just because they broke
The code.
Right.
They didn't just step over the line. It actually says, in order to protect the people, kill this person.
Right.
It wasn't to protect God from people getting too close to God. It was to protect God getting angry about unholy people getting too close, and God lashing out. And who knows where that goes. So it was in order to protect the nation that they were living. I mean, it was like they were living next to a nuclear power plant, only much bigger. And there are rules. There's rules about that.
A lot of it has to do with inside and outside, in and out. When you're unclean, you have to leave the camp for a certain amount of time. And so sometimes we associate that with like morality. When you're unclean, you're away. But I was thinking about people that live in leper colonies. They're stuck on the outside of the camp for good reason, not to infect everybody else. But that doesn't mean that they can't be seen as righteous in the sight of God, right? Their leprosy doesn't exclude them morally, although it does physically. So there are connections at times, but sometimes there's not. So that's kind of what I wrestle with.
We talked a little bit at home about how all of the detail and that kind of thing, for me, kind of just really more drives home the point of our need for Christ. That's kind of, I think that must be a lesson that like I need, because throughout all, since we've started, that's like all it comes back to for me.
Just when you talk about all the details, it's like during your sacrifices, you need to be doing these things, and like you need to live in this certain way, or like be removed from people. Is that what you're talking about? I'm clarifying for everyone else. Okay. And then because when you add Christ into the equation, a lot of these things are cleaned up. Like there's not the sacrifices that have to be made. There's not uncleanliness that you have to be removed from society for.
Something I wrote down is I keep on writing it down when I can't figure out what else to write. But these rituals, festivals, things are important to God. And here's why I think that is because like to everyone's point here is like when you're by yourself for 7 days, what are you doing if you're not reflecting? Being alone is a great time to be with God and think about Him for 7 days. That's festivals is a great time to think about God. We do traditions and rituals now that make us reflect on God and reflect on Jesus.
Are there any coming up in the next 2 weeks specifically that?
We did one this morning.
Oh, fair enough.
I mean, that's those are things that make us pause and stop and reflect on God. Those are things that are important to God to keep us focused on why. When you ask what are these rules for? Is it for God or for us? I think it's to remind Israel and to got to prepare for, this one that I'm serving, being ritually clean is, and why do you have to wash your hands? Well, it's for the Lord. And that's something that is a constant reminder of your deity that you worship.
Yes, Jacob.
This is a thought I haven't had all the way yet, but let me just say.
I
as I'm
like
thinking
the way
it.
this is starting.
Yes, yeah. Let me just say as I'm thinking it. So I think throughout all of this, clean, unclean, pure, impure, those are the same word in Hebrew. But all of that to say, God, I think separation is somewhat important to God, like John was saying. So, what does that mean when you think about the fact that he breaks that? He becomes incarnated in a human body.
He removes all actual separation.
Exactly. Just because it changes it. So just thinking about that.
He broke the actual. I mean, he met with Moses in person.
Yeah.
In person. I don't know what person means for God, but
like before the incarnation, like he's here, but he's separate.
right. And has a whole book of ways to stay separate.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yet a really strong desire to connect.
Yeah.
Because he's the God who walks with his people.
Mm-hmm.
The God in
Yeah.
search of me.
And he's the God who has gone through this incredibly elaborate, if not permanent process, to allow at least one man to be in his presence once per year.
Right.
So there's a dangerous interface that is imperfect, but still desired. And so the idea that there could be a point where all of those distractions, all of those barriers, all of that danger could be dismantled or resolved, maybe is a better word, is a really amazing thought.
Agreed.
Okay, so yeah, let me riff on that and say that maybe all of these things are less for us to get close to God and more of these things for God to get close to his people. All of these acts and rituals.
Yeah. If you guys want to be around me, these are the things that you have to do, because I can't be around you if you're not, and I don't want to kill you, but I will, or I'll have other people do it, or the earth will swallow you alive to the place of the dead people. I'm not getting over that. That's that idea, if you haven't caught on. Yes, sir.
There's also times of remembering in here, festivals that as Christians we understand are incredibly loaded, right? Passover is in here.
Mm-hmm.
We're understanding Passover in a way that it meant something to them that was really important, they're remembering back to, but they have no idea what God is going to do with that in the future, right?
Right.
God is so patient and long-suffering with his plan to redeem humanity. He will give them this festival centuries before he sends his son. Pentecost is in here as well, this harvest festival, that's going to land 50 days after Christ's death, and the Passover and the harvest that comes through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. It's amazing to me, the story and the way that God weaves it. And he had these people doing this for so long, and it did have meaning for them, but the ultimate meaning doesn't come about till his son lands on planet Earth.
There's a word where we take an idea that we have now and put it back on time. Anachronistic, yes, that's it. And yeah, so like we look back because we're 2,000 years removed from Jesus, and we go, well, of course, these festivals all set up, what you're saying, like all these festivals set up these things that are like very pivotal in Jesus' day and then moving forward. But you're absolutely right. Like, he sets these things up, and even very specifically. You said that Passover meant something different to them than it did, for the way that Jesus changed that for us. Because these people walked out of Egypt right after the Passover of the Spirit of God that killed the firstborn. That's the Passover. And so when you're we're going to celebrate the Passover, we're going to have a festival for that. These people, that hits different for them than it does for even the next generation, the generation after that, or the Jews and the Gentiles with Jesus, or us today. That just means something different. So yeah, bringing up the festivals, read through those festivals. It's a bit tedious to get through all of them, but when you see there's meaning in those things that because you can look back and see the push forward of those things. There's more to it, and it's different. So do spend time. If you didn't get through those this week, go back and read those festivals. The festivals are in chapter 29. What else got you guys this week? Yeah, the serpent that you had to look at in case you got bit by a...
Yeah. But once again, but this is in a situation, they're not supposed to make graven images, and yet then God comes out and tells Moses,
make a serpent.
Image
Yeah.
for them to specifically look at this one time. And it will save them from the current problem that they're having.
I don't know what to do with that.
I know.
Yeah.
And it would have taken time.
Right.
Bronze smithing is not, oh yeah, we got that. It's
How many people died between that ordinance coming down and them actually getting the staff or the snake staff thing up to where the people could look at it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there wouldn't have been an option while they're making it.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know, it might have been Daryl that said this, but it always struck, he didn't take the snakes away. He didn't.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He offered a path of salvation. That's,
like that.
yeah, I mean, that's,
Everybody else get that? Did everybody hear that? You want to say that just a little bit louder for
he
everybody?
didn't take the snakes away, he offered a path of salvation. So, I mean, when you think about, I don't know, my buddy Adam used to say, that'll preach, there's a.
What are your snakes today?
You're right,
Yeah.
let's stay in the scene.
What else from this week? As far as the narrative is concerned, the baton gets passed in the reading for this week from Moses to Joshua, and not 100%, but give him some of your authority in front of all of the people. And so Joshua kind of begins to take on the mantle of the leader of the Israelites right before they go in. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, passing down the priesthood, correct. So you've got, this is Marvel's Phase 4, whenever the old, spoiler alert, Iron Man is gone and Captain America is gone, and now we've got new superheroes to come in. It's a terrible analogy, I recognize that. But that you've, in the passing of the generation, everybody has to go before we can move on. And so, he talks, it says, Aaron died and they mourned for 30 days. Well, these people have to die in order for the next group to take over, for them to be able to move into the promised land.
When Joshua becomes kind of the new leader, you don't see a real fall off or a dip of people going, "Oh, we liked Moses," and maybe that says something. But I was just thinking about today how certain people might pick a church or leave a church based upon who's up front. It just shows me that, yes, Joshua is the mouthpiece of the Lord, but the leader is still God. So whether you take Moses and put him in charge, or it's Joshua, there's still the Lord that is leading them. And I think the people of Israel at least can see that, at least towards the end. Maybe it's the next generation. It's like, all right, Joshua, we're ready to follow you because they're following God, not Joshua.
Right. Yeah, there's a bigger leader. And then, like, it crashes after that, and they're like, we need a king. And that's somebody else's class that they get to teach. I'm not going to infringe on 4 books from now. So, yeah, it is interesting that God, or that the transition of power seems pretty seamless. Yeah, okay, Joshua's going to be in charge. Sounds good. What time does class end? 11:15. Oops. Hey, thank you guys. That's all I have. That's it. You're dismissed.